Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Please consider subscribing and check out our Patreon for more. Enjoy the video. Janet sighed as she watched her son Caleb trudge in the front door, his shoulders slumped and head hanging low. He dropped his backpack beside the couch with a thud and flopped down, burying his face in one of the throw pillows. Rough day, huh? Janet asked sympathetically, trying to catch his eye. Caleb just grunted non-committally into the pillow, not bothering to look up. Janet's brow furrowed with concern. This moody, withdrawn version of her usually cheerful son was becoming an all-too-common sight lately. She sat down on the edge of the couch and placed a gentle hand on his back. "Wanna tell me about it? I'm always here to listen, you know." With a long sigh, Caleb finally turned his head to peer at her with one bloodshot eye. "It's nothing, Mom. School just sucks. That's all." "I'm sorry to hear that, honey. Anything in particular that's bugging you? Are the classes getting harder?" "I don't know, maybe. The work is piling up and I just can't seem to keep on top of it." Caleb picked at a loose thread on the pillow. "And I barely have any time to just chill anymore between school, practice, and all the other crap I have to do." Janet nodded, her heart aching at the weariness in her son's voice. "I know sophomore year can be tough, with everything you've got on your plate. But I also know how smart and capable you are. Maybe we can sit down this weekend and come up with a plan to manage your time better, break down those assignments into smaller chunks so they don't feel so overwhelming. What do you think?" "I guess," Caleb mumbled, sounding less than enthusiastic about the prospect. He hauled himself upright with a groan. "Can I go lay down for a bit before dinner? I've got a killer headache." "Of course, sweetie. I'll come get you when it's ready." Janet watched as Caleb shuffled off towards his room, noting the droop of his shoulders and the way he seemed to drag his feet with every step. It was becoming painfully clear that something more than just a heavy workload was weighing on him. But what exactly that something was, Janet couldn't say. Caleb had always been a bit of an open book, wearing his heart on his sleeve and freely sharing the ups and downs of his day. Lately, though, he'd gotten so withdrawn and evasive whenever she tried to dig deeper. Generic complaints about school being hard and having too much to do were all she could get out of him. With a sigh, Janet headed to the kitchen to start on dinner, her mind still turning over the mystery of her son's melancholy. She chopped vegetables on autopilot, mixing up a stir-fry while barely tasting the sauce. By the time she called Caleb to the table, Janet had resolved to redouble her efforts to get to the bottom of what was bothering him. She'd schedule some one-on-one time this weekend, maybe take him out for burgers and a movie like they used to when he was little. Surely if she could get him in a more relaxed environment, away from the stresses of school and sports, he'd open up to her. They ate mostly in silence, with Caleb picking at his food and giving monosyllabic answers to her attempts at conversation. He disappeared back to his room as soon as his plate was clear. Janet tidied up the kitchen by herself, trying to tamp down the worry gurgling in her gut. Later that evening, she tapped on Caleb's door, a basket of clean laundry balanced on her hip. "Knock, knock," she called softly. "I come bearing fresh pajamas and socks. Can I come in?" After a moment, Caleb's muffled voice rang out. "Yeah, I guess." Janet pushed open the door and had to step carefully to avoid tripping over the clothes and sports gear scattered all over the floor. Caleb was sprawled on his bed, flicking listlessly through his phone. The glow of the screen illuminated his face, making the shadows under his eyes look even darker. "Yeesh, looks like a tornado hit in here," Janet quipped, setting the laundry basket down on his desk chair. "Guess we're overdue for a deep clean, huh? Maybe we can tackle that this weekend, get you set up and organized again." Caleb just shrugged, his eyes still glued to his phone. "If we have to, I guess." Janet perched on the edge of the bed, studying her son's face. Even in the phone's glow, she could see how dull and sad his eyes looked, missing the spark of enthusiasm that used to be ever present. She reached over and gently tucked an errant lock of hair behind his ear. "You know you can always talk to me, right, baby?" she said softly. "About anything." big or small. I'm always in your corner, no matter what. I know something's eating at you lately, more than just school stress. I really wish you'd let me in so I can try to help." For just a second, Janet thought she saw Caleb's chin quiver, a sheen of moisture glinting in his eyes. But he blinked hard and looked away, the moment gone as quick as it came. "I'm fine, Mom, really," he muttered, rolling to his side and curling around his pillow. "I'm just tired, that's all. School is kicking my butt and I feel like I can barely keep my head above water." Janet rubbed his back, wishing not for the first time that she could somehow absorb all his hurt and struggle herself. "Okay, sweetie. But please, if it ever feels like more than you can handle, you've got to let me know. We'll figure it out together, I promise. For now, try to get some sleep. Things will look brighter in the morning." She bent and kissed his temple, breathing in the clean, slightly spicy scent of his hair. He was getting so tall now, nearly a man in so many ways. But he would always be her baby. "Night, Mom," Caleb whispered, already sounding halfway to sleep. "Love you." "I love you too, honey. More than anything." Janet stood and crept to the door, flicking off the light. She gazed at the Caleb-sized lump on the bed, listening to his breathing deepen and slow. Over the next week, Janet did her best to connect with Caleb and unravel the source of his discontent. But the more she pushed, however gently, the more he seemed to retreat into himself. Their cleaning day that weekend turned into Caleb sleeping until noon, then rushing off to a group project meetup. She managed to finagle him into going out for dinner one night, but he spent most of the meal engrossed in his phone, only surfacing to give brief, bland answers to her questions about school and friends. Rather than the heart-to-heart she'd hoped for, it felt more like an interrogation, one he was determined to say as little in as possible. Janet came home from work one evening to find him passed out on the couch, still in his practice uniform, his algebra book lying forgotten on the floor. Dark smudges lingered under his eyes even in sleep, and he looked utterly wrung out. She draped a blanket over him and pressed a feather-light kiss to his forehead, noting the furrow still between his brows. "What's going on in that head of yours?" she murmured, smoothing her thumb over the worry lines. "I wish you'd let me in." But Caleb slept on, lost in whatever troubled dreams plagued him. With a sigh, Janet left him to his slumber and went to warm up leftovers. Pushing him when he was already stretched so thin would get her nowhere. The days dragged on, and Caleb's mood only seemed to sour further. His grades began to slip, and Janet got an email from his English teacher about missing assignments. When she tried to broach the subject, Caleb exploded. "God, get off my back!" he snapped, slamming his pencil down on his half-finished chemistry worksheet. "I'll get it done, okay? I'm not an idiot." "I never said you were," Janet replied evenly, taken aback by his outburst, but trying not to show it. "I'm just worried about you, honey. This isn't like you."
"Well, maybe this is the new me,"
Caleb retorted, shoving away from the table so hard his chair nearly tipped over.
"Maybe I'm just a screw-up who can't hack it anymore, so you can stop waiting for the old Caleb to come back and just get used to being disappointed."
With that, he stormed off to his room, the door slamming behind him with a bang that made Janet flinch. She stared after him, feeling lost and heartsick. What had happened to her sweet, sunny boy? When had all this anger and hopelessness taken root? Over the next few days, Caleb's sullen, withdrawn behavior only worsened. He spoke in monosyllables, barely making eye contact, his shoulders perpetually hunched as if trying to collapse in on himself. Janet's heart ached to see her once vibrant boy reduced to a ghost, listlessly drifting through the motions of his life. On Thursday afternoon, while Caleb was at school, Janet found herself yet again hovering outside his bedroom door, paralyzed by indecision. Snooping through his things felt like a massive violation of his privacy, the nuclear option to be used only in the most dire of circumstances. But her gut told her they were rapidly approaching that point, if not already past it. Caleb was drowning in something, and if he wouldn't throw her a line, she'd have to dive in after him. Consequences be damned. Janet squared her shoulders and pushed into the room before she could second-guess herself again. She started with his desk, rifling through piles of scribbled notes and half-finished assignments, searching for anything that might shed light on his state of mind. A quick skim of his browser history revealed nothing more scandalous than too much time on YouTube and Reddit. His text messages were mundane, brief exchanges about homework and practice times. Janet was about to give up, beginning to feel foolish, when a flash of color in the very back of Caleb's bottom desk drawer caught her eye. Buried under a stack of old notebooks was the unmistakable scrap of floral fabric. Hands shaking slightly, Janet tugged it free. It was a skirt, just a simple, flowy thing in a cheerful yellow print. Janet stared at in incomprehension for a long moment, trying to make it fit with her image of her all-American jock son. Had a girl left it here at some point? But no, they hadn't had company in ages, and in any case it looked brand new, the tags still attached. She was still puzzling over the incongruous garment when she heard the front door open and close, followed by the thud of Caleb's backpack hitting the floor. Heart in her throat, Janet hastily stuffed the skirt back in the drawer and all but ran out of the room, pulling the door shut behind her. "Hey, honey, how was school?" she asked, trying to keep her voice normal as Caleb came into view. If he noticed the guilty flush in her cheeks or the way her hands shook as she started pulling out ingredients for dinner, he didn't mention it. "Fine," he grunted, already making a beeline for his room. The door snicked shut behind him, and Janet let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her mind raced as she went through the motions of fixing dinner on autopilot, trying to parse out the meaning behind her discovery. All through the meal, as Caleb sat silent and stone-faced across from her, she studied him, searching for some hint of an explanation in the slope of his shoulders or the furrow of his brow. Later that night, after making sure Caleb was absorbed in his homework, Janet settled herself at the computer and typed "teenage boy skirt" into the search bar with trembling fingers. She felt vaguely silly, half expecting to find nothing but wacky costumes and gag gifs. Instead, what she got was pages upon pages of information about transgender youth and the process of transitioning. She clicked link after link, falling down a rabbit hole of first-person accounts from kids Caleb's age, telling their stories of feeling out of place in their own skin, of the depression and anxiety that came with hiding their true selves. The pieces began to click into place with sickening clarity. Caleb's withdrawal, his irritability and plummeting grades, the sense that he was drifting further away from her by the day. It all made a terrible kind of sense if he was dealing with gender dysphoria on top of the normal teenage chaos. Long after the house had gone dark and quiet, Janet sat staring at the myriad of tabs open on her screen, trying to wrap her mind around this new reality. How had she missed this? How long had Caleb been struggling in silence while she remained oblivious? Some distant part of her knew it wasn't her fault, that Caleb had clearly worked hard to keep this part of himself hidden. Kids in his situation faced so much stigma and confusion, it was no wonder he felt he couldn't come to her. But the guilt still gnawed at her. In the weeks that followed, Janet found herself watching Caleb even more closely than usual, studying him for clues now that she knew what to look for. She noted the way his gaze lingered on girls' clothing in store windows, how quickly he changed the channel when shows depicting trans characters came on. Little things she'd always chalked up to teenage moodiness suddenly took on new meaning. His resistance to buying new clothes, his discomfort with his changing body. He'd all but stopped going to the pool, and Janet realized now it was likely to avoid being seen in a swimsuit. It killed her to watch him suffer in silence, but Janet held her tongue, unsure how to broach such a sensitive topic. What if her hunch was completely off base? The last thing she wanted was to make Caleb even more self-conscious and push him further away. But then one evening, she got home from work early to find Caleb standing in front of the full-length mirror on his closet door. For a split second before he registered her presence, Janet saw him smooth a hand over the yellow skirt that had started this whole journey of discovery. The look on his face was one of such longing it made her heart clench. Caleb whirled around at her gasp, pure panic lighting his eyes at being caught out. The skirt fluttered to the floor as he stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Janet crossed the room in 2 quick strides and gathered her shaking child into her arms, holding on tight. "Shh, baby, it's okay," she soothed, as Caleb broke down in great, gulping sobs against her shoulder. "You don't have to hide anymore. I'm here. I've got you." Caleb clung to his mother like a lifeline, his body shaking with the force of his sobs. All the fear and shame and confusion he'd been bottling up for so long came pouring out in a tidal wave of emotion. He couldn't even begin to form words, his throat closed tight around the jumble of thoughts whirling in his head. But Janet just held him, one hand rubbing soothing circles on his back while the other cradled his head against her shoulder. "It's all right, sweetheart," she murmured. "Just let it out."
"I'm right here."
They stood like that for a long time, until Caleb's sobs finally began to taper off into shuddering breaths and the occasional hiccup. Janet eased him down to sit on the edge of the bed, keeping an arm around his shoulders. With her free hand, she grabbing a tissue from the box on his nightstand and gently wiped his tear-streaked face. I don't," Caleb croaked, his voice raw and paper-thin. He didn't even know where to begin. How could he possibly explain the maelstrom inside him when he barely understood it himself? Fresh tears welled in his eyes and spilled over, carving new tracks down his cheeks. "Shh, you don't have to say anything right now," Janet soothed. She brushed his hair back from his forehead, tucking an errant lock behind his ear. "Just breathe, okay? Nice and slow. In and out." Caleb tried to match his breathing to hers, focusing on the steady rise and fall of her chest. Slowly, the tightness in his own chest began to ease, the roaring in his ears quieting to a dull buzz. He unclenched his hands from where they had twisted in the hem of his shirt, forcing his fingers to relax. "I'm sorry," he whispered, shame creeping in to replace the panic as the reality of the situation sank in. His mother had caught him red-handed, prancing around in a skirt like some kind of freak. Disgust lodged thick and cloying in his throat. I never meant for you to see that." "You have nothing to apologize for," Janet said firmly. "Absolutely nothing, you hear me?" She tilted his chin up, forcing him to meet her eyes. What he saw there made fresh moisture sting his own, not a trace of the revulsion or disappointment he'd feared, only warmth and concern. "I know this must be so scary and confusing for you right now," she continued. "But I need you to know that there is nothing wrong with you, Caleb. Nothing at all. And I will love you and support you no matter what, okay? No matter how you choose to express yourself or who you grow up to be." A small, choked noise escaped Caleb's throat, somewhere between a laugh and a sob. He wanted so badly to believe her, to trust that her acceptance was unconditional. But a lifetime of absorbing society's messages about masculinity and the shame of deviation had left scars, ones not so easily soothed by a single conversation. "You don't know what you're talking about," he mumbled, pulling away from her touch. You can't understand what it's like." He glanced toward the closet where that treacherous bit of yellow fabric lay crumpled on the floor, feeling his face heat. "Then help me understand," Janet entreated softly. "I want to, Caleb, I really do. But I can't unless you talk to me." She reached for his hand, twining their fingers together and giving a gentle squeeze. Caleb stared down at their joined hands for a long moment, trying to order the chaos of his thoughts into something resembling coherence. How could he even begin to articulate the bone-deep wrongness he felt in his own body? The way his skin crawled when he looked in the mirror and saw the broadening shoulders and angular jaw of a man staring back? I don't know how to explain it," he said finally, his voice small and strained. "It sounds so stupid when I try to put it into words. Like, who gets depressed over going through puberty? Every guy does, it's not a big deal." But it is a big deal to you, Janet countered gently. And that's okay, Caleb. Your feelings are valid, even if you don't fully understand them yet. She gave his hand another squeeze. Have you been struggling with your gender identity for a while now? Caleb flinched slightly at the question, his gaze darting involuntarily back to the closet. He swallowed hard before answering, the words tasting like broken glass in his mouth. I guess so. I mean, yeah, for a few years now. Thanks for watching. Check out Patreon if you want to have early access to the other parts. If not, it will be online in a couple of days.